Hi, my name's Eric. I'll be reading you selections from the e-edition of today's Cape Cod Times. Today's date is Monday, July 1st of 2024. Today we'll start with the weather. Across the Cape and Islands, mostly cloudy, breezy, and less humid than it has been. High of 73, a low of 60 in the overnight with it clearing. Tomorrow, Tuesday, mostly sunny, pleasant, and warmer than it is today. High of almost 80, a low of 59 in the overnight. Wednesday, partly sunny and pleasant. Again, high of almost 80, low of 66. On Thursday, the 4th of July, breezy and humid with clouds and sun. High of 80, low of 68. And on Friday, cloudy and humid. High of 82, a low of 71 in the overnight. So beautiful couple of days coming up. Today, Tuesday, Wednesday, even Thursday, although it will get a little more humid as we head into the weekend. The sun will rise at 5:11 a.m. It will set at 8:19 p.m. We'll have 15 hours, 8 minutes of daylight, and the moon will rise at 1:27 a.m. and set at 4:17 p.m. Now we'll go to the front of the paper where the news and the lottery results are kept. And we read these lottery results because, well, somebody asked for them. If there's something you would like read to people who are blind or print disabled, you can email us at info@audiblelocalledger.org or call us at 508-539-2030, and we'll consider reading it. And if you miss any of the information that we share in our readings, you can always go to audiblelocalledger.org. And in the upper right corner is the Archived Readings tab. Click on that, and you'll find a week's worth of our newspapers so you can catch up on anything that you might have missed. And we keep our shopping guides up there so you can always know what is on sale at the grocery store. And that's important. And we've recently added Whole Foods to it, as well as the basics: Hannaford, Stop and Shop, Trukey's, Shaw's, Star, Market Basket. They're all there. Big Y, and Roach Brothers. So all of that is free for people who are blind or print disabled at audiblelocalledger.org. Now, for the latest lottery results, we go to the masslottery.com website because the Cape Cod Times goes to press too early to give you the latest results, and if you ask for them, you certainly deserve them. So for the numbers game of Sunday, June 30th, yesterday in the midday drawing, the numbers were 8809. Again, yesterday's midday drawing of the numbers game, 8809. In the evening drawing last night, for Sunday, June 30th, the results were 8159. Again, last night's numbers game results in the evening, 8159. Mass cash for Sunday, June 30th, 9, 14, 27, 31, and 32. And Lucky for Life rounds out our lottery results for Sunday, June 30th with 6, 9, 12, 24, and 32, with 14, the bonus number. Good luck to all who play. Remember us if you win. From the front page of today's Cape Cod Times, dated July 1st, a Monday of 2024, what's the wind plan? Is the headline above the fold, if there was such a thing in a digital newspaper. Cape and Islands leaders seek more time to comment on offshore leases, by Heather McCarran. As a July 1st deadline approached for comments to be submitted to the federal government regarding a proposal to auction offshore wind leases in the Gulf of Maine, including off the outermost Cape towns, the region's leaders wanted more time to weigh in. The Cape and Islands Municipal Leaders Association, which is an organization of 105 elected officials representing all 22 towns on the Cape, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard, has sent a letter to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the BOEM, requesting to extend the deadline to July 22nd. BOEM opened the public comment period on the proposed sale notice for leases on May 1st, a day after announcing its plan for first-time ever offering of nearly 1 million ocean acres in the Gulf of Maine for offshore wind production. This comment period extension will allow for additional public meetings to address comments and concerns and provide for a more streamlined permitting, construction and operation of what is likely the most significant investment in energy facilities ever to be made, the association's June 25th letter reads. The letter also details 13 specific comments and concerns the organization has related to the leasing plan, including questions about potential installation of floating turbines, impacts on small fisheries and ports, and environmental effects, among others. 8 potential lease areas are proposed in the Gulf of Maine, 3 totaling 363,305 acres due east of Wellfleet and Truro, starting about 24 miles offshore and stretching eastward. 3 due east of Boston, beyond the eastern boundary of the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary at the mouth of Massachusetts Bay, and 2 due east of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and southeast of Portland, Maine. Those areas have the potential to generate 15 gigawatts of renewable energy, which would power more than 5 million homes, according to the federal agency. It's possible that some turbines would be visible given very clear conditions, and depending on the final height of the structures from the Atlantic Ocean bluffs in Truro. On Thursday, Cape and Islands Municipal Leaders Association President Douglas Brown said the first formal presentation the organization had about the plans for the Gulf of Maine was at its annual meeting on Martha's Vineyard on June 14th. A couple of days before the meeting, I got an email from somebody at BOEM, and he asked if they could join us, he said. That's when the region's leaders first realized as a group how much of a stake the region has, he said. They came in and they showed us the lease areas, Brown said. Somebody after the meeting came over and said, "Wow, that's awfully close to Cape Cod. Not like I expected it to be for the Gulf of Maine." He said despite some notices from BOEM prior to June about the impending Gulf of Maine proposed sale notice, many missed a full understanding of just how far the area extended. In his mind, the Gulf ends at the top of Cape Cod, and the waters east of the Cape are open Atlantic Ocean. I guess it, meaning the Gulf, ends in Chatham now, he said. 6 of the 8 proposed lease areas are closer to Cape Cod than they are to Maine, he said. I don't know when there was a BOEM meeting about this on Cape Cod, Brown said. There's a lot of stuff we need to think about and talk about it. The July 22nd public comment period extension the Cape Cod and Islands leaders are asking for, coincides with another public comment period for a draft environmental assessment that just opened on June 21st. The assessment considers site characterization surveys, such as biological, archaeological, geological, and geophysical surveys and core samples, as well as installation of meteorological buoys expected to occur following issuance of leases, according to the agency. As for the public comments on the lease sites, at this time, closing July 1st, the BOEM is specifically seeking feedback on various aspects of the proposed lease areas, including size, orientation, and location of the 8 lease areas, and which areas, if any, should be prioritized for inclusion or exclusion from this year's scheduled lease sale. To submit comments, you can visit regulations.gov and in the search box enter BOEM-2024-0026. For the comments section on the lease sites, click search and then follow the instructions to submit public comments. To submit comments on the draft environmental assessment, enter BOEM-2024-0030 into the search box. Virtual meetings are also scheduled for reviewing the draft environmental assessment on Monday, July 8th at 1 p.m. and Wednesday, July 10th at 5 p.m. Registration links are available at www.boem.gov/renewable-energy. Also from the front page, stranding of 80 to 100 dolphins in Wellfleet with rescue underway by Eric Williams. More than 80 Atlantic white-sided dolphins became stranded in Wellfleet Friday, around the time of low tide. At about 11:30 a.m., the animals were scattered across a large area known as the Gut between Great Island and the Herring River Dike. Many of the animals were completely out of the water, while some were visible in shallow water nearby. Many had been covered with tarps to protect them from the sun. Rescuers from the International Fund for Animal Welfare were aiding the stranded dolphins. At the scene, Misty Niemeyer, stranding coordinator for IFAW's Marine Mammal Rescue Team, said initial reports indicated that 10 dolphins were struggling in the area. Now we have about 80 to 100 Atlantic white-sided dolphins stranded in the shallow water and the mud here, she said. Some of the dolphins may already have died. We do suspect there are a few that have died already. We think maybe about 20, but we're working with the field team down there to get a better estimate. But as the tide began to turn, there was hope that some of the dolphins could be saved. If we can get them back in the water and get them out of this area, they have a good chance. But this is a very big stranding event, so we're going to do our best, said Niemeyer. The size of the stranding is a big challenge for rescuers. We usually would extract the animals, put them in our trucks, and move them outside of this area, but there's just too many animals to do that, said Niemeyer. So we're going to try and refloat them as the tide comes in, and then try to encourage them out and try to get as many out as we can. Niemeyer was asked if this was the largest stranding she had seen in her career. This is one of the biggest ones that I know of since I've been here in 15 years, she said. And there are photos of the volunteers trying to help these dolphins, which are clearly in distress. Keeping it local, Marston's Mill's deck collapses. 7 people are sent to the hospital by Zane Razak. 7 people were sent to the hospital after a porch collapsed in Marston's Mills on Saturday night, according to the Centerville-Osterville-Marston's Mills Fire Department. First responders arrived to 63 Mountain Ash Road at 8:48 p.m. after receiving reports of a deck collapse. 7 people were brought to the hospital, all with non-life-threatening injuries, according to the fire department press release. COMM Fire Department, including mutual aid units from Cotuit Fire Department, West Barnstable Fire Department, and Mashpee Fire Department, brought patients to Cape Cod Hospital. The cause of the collapse remains under investigation. Fireworks and more on Cape Cod for the 4th of July by Frankie Rowley. Keep your dogs inside and somewhere quiet if you can. They do not like fireworks in general. 4th of July on Cape Cod is full of fireworks, parades, and festivals. And if you're wondering just what's in store for this year's set of celebrations, well, fear not, we've got you covered. The Cape Cod 4th of July fireworks, festivals, and parades. On Tuesday, July 2nd, tomorrow, in Chatham. Chatham's 4th of July fireworks will be set off at dusk on July 2nd from Veterans Field. In Orleans tomorrow, Orleans 4th of July fireworks will be set off at dusk on July 2nd from Rock Harbor. On Thursday, July 4th, we jump right to the big day, Thursday, July 4th in Barnstable at 9 a.m. on July 4th. Floats will glide through Barnstable Village as part of the Barnstable Civic Association's 4th of July parade. In Centerville, there'll be a 4th of July parade presented by the Centerville Civic Association that begins at 9 a.m. on July 4th with the raising of the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, and a performance of America the Beautiful. At 10:30 a.m., the Scout Troop 54 Color Guard and a Centerville fire truck will lead the parade from Centerville Elementary School to Bumps River Road, and then Park Avenue and onto Main Street, ending at the Centerville Recreation Center. Hot dogs, ice cream, cotton candy, face painting, and awards will await parade attendees and participants at the finish line. In Chatham, on the 4th, the town's 4th of July parade will set off at 9:30 a.m. from Main Street. This year's theme is Chatham. It's a shore thing, according to Chatham's parade's website. In Cotuit, their 4th of July parade begins at 11 a.m. on July 4th on School Street, and then it goes down Main Street toward the old Cotuit Elementary School, where the parade will culminate. The parade is presented by the Cotuit Civic Association. In Falmouth, the 4th of July fireworks will be set off from Falmouth Heights Beach at dusk on July 4th, according to the Falmouth Police Department's website. In Hyannisport Mini Marathon and Parade sets off from the Hyannisport Post Office at 9 a.m., followed by the parade at 11 a.m., which begins at the same location. The parade will run from the post office to Washington Avenue to Lafayette Avenue, then to Winchester Avenue, Scudder Avenue, and Dale Avenue, before ending at the West Beach Club. Live music and performances on Main Street and the bandstand on the Village Green begin at 4 p.m., featuring a slew of local acts like the Cape Cod Ukulele Club and a reenactment from the Yarmouth Minutemen. At 5 p.m., the annual Hyannis Harbor Boat Parade begins. At 4:30 p.m., boats decked out in red, white, and blue will begin lining up in the inner harbor before looping around to show off their patriotism to onlookers at Bismore Park. The Cape Symphony's Joy 4 July concert rounds out the celebrations at 7:30 p.m. A rain date for the show is set for July 5th. A map of parking lots near the festivities is available on the Town of Barnstable's website. In Orleans, the town's parade will set off at 10 a.m. on July 4th from Eldridge Parkway. A full parade route and more information is available on the Orleans 4th of July Committee's website. In Provincetown, their 4th of July parade will begin at 11 a.m. on July 4th at the Harbor Hotel. It'll be followed by fireworks at McMillan Pier at dusk, typically a little before 9 p.m., according to Radu Luca, who's executive director of the Provincetown Chamber of Commerce. In Sandwich, the town's parade is scheduled to take off at 10:30 a.m. on July 4th from the Henry T. Wing School. The Spirit of Sandwich 5K road race sets off at 8 a.m. from the Henry T. Wing School, and registration will be open on race day from 6:45 to 7:45 a.m., and it's $15 for runners 14 years old and up, $10 for runners 13 years old and under. In Wellfleet's 4th of July parade begins at 10 a.m. on July 4th at the town pier. As always, the Antique Car Parade will head down the route first, starting at 9:30 a.m., and it'll be followed by the 4th of July parade. The theme of this year's parade is fishing for a good time. And then Friday, July 5th, in Cotuit, the Cotuit Firecracker Road Race sets off at 5 p.m. at Lowell Park. And in Falmouth, Friday is the rain date for the Falmouth fireworks. From the Cape and Islands section, lawmaker says Riviello death shows need for hospital legislation, by Heather McCarran. Around 7 a.m. on June 18th, as a heat wave settled over Massachusetts, Rodney Riviello put aside his coffee cup, got up from his customary chair in the Manomet home he shared with his wife Julie, and headed out for a morning walk. He never returned home, and his disappearance launched a massive search by police, family, friends, and concerned citizens from Cape Cod to New York. 4 days later, Riviello's body was found in a Plymouth marsh, his New York Yankees cap at his side, and a discharge paper from Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Plymouth in his hand. The loss has left his son, Provincetown Assistant Town Manager Dan Riviello, daughter Michelle Norris of Boxborough, and their mother, asking questions and calling for measures to prevent similar tragedies from happening to other families. Others on Cape Cod expressed sympathy, understanding, concern, and caution following the news of Riviello's death. While we try to understand what happened, we want to recognize this nightmare could happen to anyone's father or grandfather, the Riviello family said in a statement. We hope sharing his story will shed light on gaps in hospital protocols for elderly patients with cognitive issues, and we're asking for immediate safeguards that require a safe handoff to a family member or caregiver. The Plymouth Hospital did not respond to a phone call or an email seeking comment. Riviello's walk wasn't anything out of the ordinary, as the 69-year-old was a man who enjoyed the simple pleasures of reading his newspaper, having his coffee, watching game shows, and spending time with family, routinely took a morning constitutional. But for people who are developing or living with diagnosed memory loss and dementia, ordinary things can quickly become a crisis. What can happen for people living with cognitive loss is they can get confused, and there can be safety concerns, said Molly Perdue, co-founder and executive director of the Alzheimer's Family Support Center of Cape Cod. Over the last couple of years, Riviello had been showing some signs of memory loss and a decline in his critical thinking and problem-solving skills, though he wasn't yet formally diagnosed with dementia, according to his son. At some point during his walk on June 18th, Riviello apparently fell, and two strangers stepped in to help, leading to an ambulance ride to the hospital at 275 Sandwich Street in Plymouth, which was about 6 miles from his home. There, he was treated for a broken nose and a hematoma from his fall. A CT scan also revealed he had cerebral small vessel disease, which can cause dementia, his family said. About 3 hours after his arrival at the emergency room, Riviello was released. The hospital staff was working on getting him a cab or Lyft ride home when he wandered out of the building about 11:15 a.m. His family said none of them had received a phone call informing them about his hospital visit. It remains unclear whether Riviello's release had anything to do with hospital protocols, a lack of staffing, or simply just not fully recognizing the extent of his cognitive impairment. Purdue said dementia can be difficult to recognize, particularly if spending a short amount of time with a person with developing or full-on dementia. What's hard about dementia is people can seem okay with it. They can seem with it. People can have moments of acute confusion, but they can then seem okay. She said it can be really hard unless you've got a little bit of training to realize there's something that's just not quite right. Diseases that rob people of cognitive health can take time to manifest, taking up to 20 years for some, Purdue said. Age is the number one risk factor for cognitive loss. Purdue's an advocate for helping communities become more dementia-friendly, especially considering that the number of people with dementia is rising not only on Cape Cod, but in the country. It's important to educate community members from grocery store clerks to bank tellers to emergency personnel about what to look for, and ultimately help everyone living with cognitive loss be a little safer in our communities, she said. People don't wear red A's on their shirts, she said of individuals with cognitive loss. Wandering, Purdue noted, is one of many dementia behaviors that can be life-threatening. My heart goes out to the family. It's so hard, Purdue said. State Senator Julian Cyr, a Democrat from Truro, said he too grieves for the Riviello family and agrees with them that Riviello's story does bring up a subject that legislators may want to address. I certainly have questions as to how this happened, and if there are protocols and policies that need to be put into place to ensure that patients with memory issues, dementia, and Alzheimer's are not at risk when it comes to discharge, said Cyr, who serves as chairman of the Joint Committee on Public Health and is also on the Joint Committee on Elder Affairs. Senator Susan Moran, a Democrat from Falmouth whose district includes Plymouth, declined comment. At Cape Cod Hospital, Cape Cod Healthcare, Chief Medical Officer William Agle said, Cape Cod Healthcare always takes the safety of our patients into consideration when determining the proper disposition of people in our care, and we continually reassess our processes based on current thinking, medical science, and our patients' needs. Even as they share Riviello's story in hopes of raising awareness and preventing similar tragedies, family members are celebrating his life. We will miss him endlessly, and we're eternally grateful for what he gave us and everyone who knew him, they wrote in their statement. Rodney was everyone's favorite meat cutter in his hometown of Clyde, New York, and hundreds considered him a best friend because if you were with him, you felt like the most important person in his day. Riviello's influence has even been felt by those who didn't personally know him. In Provincetown, he made a difference through his son. I've worked closely with Dan since he arrived here in September of 22, said Provincetown town manager Alex Morse. I've seen up close and personal how deeply Dan loved and cared for his father. It pains me and many others he has to experience this magnitude of loss. Many of us in Provincetown didn't have the privilege of meeting Dan's father, Morse added, but knowing and working with Dan gives us a sense of the kind of person he was, and we're better for it. Riviello's family said he was proud of his family and would be proud of us now, not just for the way we've gotten through the past week, but for the way we'll move forward from this preventable tragedy, working to make things better for those just like him, they wrote. A celebration of life is planned on July 7th in Riviello's hometown of Clyde, New York. It would have been his 70th birthday. Also from the Cape and Islands section, Massachusetts says new filings for unemployment benefits went up. Initial filings for unemployment benefits in Massachusetts rose last week compared with a week prior, the U.S. Department of Labor said Thursday. New jobless claims, which is a proxy for layoffs, increased to 8,970 in the week ending June 22nd. That's up from 5,226 the week before, the Labor Department said. U.S. unemployment claims dropped to 233,000 last week. That's down 6,000 claims from the 239,000 it was the week prior on a seasonally adjusted basis. Vermont saw the largest percentage increase in weekly claims, with claims jumping by 268.4%. Delaware, meanwhile, saw the largest percentage drop in new claims, with claims dropping by 38.1%. There's an editorial note. The USA Today Network has published localized versions of this story on its news sites across the country. It's generated with data from the U.S. Department of Labor's weekly unemployment insurance claims report. Final story in the Cape and Islands is by their photographer, Steve Heslip. A sharp photo of someone jumping into the water halfway in. And there's a photo of looks like a hand and some water. The blink of an eye, an often used phrase for time passing too quickly. The average eye blink is said to be about a third of a second. Practicing the craft of photography requires a much more disciplined approach to time management. The Greek-derived word literally means light drawing. During the 1800s, as the photo process evolved, the time it took to make a camera exposure would be measured in minutes. Film materials became more light-sensitive, giving way to digital sensors, which now allow image making in near-total darkness. Like nuclear scientists splitting atoms, camera engineers now offer unheard-of microsecond splitting shutter speeds. A new camera announcement several weeks ago touted an electronic shutter speed of 1/16,000th of a second on a consumer price model. There's a high school math class word problem trying to compare that to a third of a second, which I won't tackle. But what is the practicality of such a number? The weakest link of any machine is the human operator, so let's start there. The top shutter speed on my trusty old 2008 Nikon is 1/8000, half as fast as the new model. The 16-year-old Warhorse still sounds fast. Let's pick a fast-moving subject and capture it at peak motion. Should be easy. Simple subject and a repeating task showing motion is needed. A person jumping in water. Splashing liquids make good stop-action images. The photo concept, a sharp photo of a person jumping in the water, halfway in the water. Now the hard part, timing. No matter how fast a shutter is, the eye, brain, and finger push the shutter release sequence is the key to success. New electronic viewfinder cameras have no mirror to slow things down, so extra credit for them. But the rule with old school cameras, if you see the image, you missed it, as the mirror was up blocking the view. Back at the water, our shutter is set at 1/800, and willing subjects are jumping. There's an image. It shows the results. Great water splash, but just a hand. I would argue a great storytelling image to the photo editor, as the situation was a life-saving drill, but terribly late on the trigger. Technology will always arrive every few months, offering to bring us newer and better. A lot can happen in the blink of an eye, but the blink of a shutter never lies. Practice and technique usually beat technology. We're at the midway point in our reading. Regular listeners are aware, I'm sure it's at this stage that we move to a different kind of local news, which is the obituaries and death notices that are listed in that day's newspaper. In the Cape Cod Times of Monday, July 1st, there's one obituary. It's of Elizabeth Johnson, passed on June 16th. Ms. Johnson attended Jeanne d'Arc Academy in Milton, Miss Allen's Modeling and Finishing School in Boston, Bishop Lee Theater School on Beacon Hill, and the Pittsburgh Playhouse School of Theater. An accomplished actress, she performed in numerous plays, including Summer Stock with the Circle Players of Beacon Hill and the Booth Bay Playhouse. She found her true calling answering an ad for classified advertising at the Boston Herald. Mrs. Johnson was the first woman promoted to real estate executive and was the Boston Herald representative on Cape Cod, also known as Betty Drake. She received many awards throughout her 41 years at the Herald. She fell in love with Cape Cod while working there and eventually built a home in Bourne. After retiring from the Herald, she worked as an agent for Jack Conway Real Estate on Cape Cod. Mrs. Johnson had 3 passions in her life: dogs, clothes, and convertibles. She was a dog fancier, entering her show Lhasa Apsos, a member of the Merrimack Lhasa Apso Club, Companion Animals Club of Cape Cod, and was active with her Brussels Griffon, Andrea, an AKC Good Citizen. She brought Andrea for companion visits to nursing homes. She was a member of the Bourne Women's Club and an American Legion Post 188 auxiliary. Betty volunteered at Falmouth Hospital Emergency Room reception desk for 15 years. As a breast cancer survivor since 2009, she was active in the breast cancer support group at Falmouth Hospital and a frequent visitor to the Bourne Council on Aging. For many winters, she resided in Ellenton, Florida. She is survived by many family and friends who will miss her dearly. A visitation will be held from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Monday, July 8th, at the Nickerson Bourne Funeral Home at 40 MacArthur Boulevard in Bourne, with a burial to follow at the Massachusetts National Cemetery for 11:30 a.m. In lieu of flowers, any donations in her memory may be made to an animal shelter of one's choice or St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, 501 St. Jude Place in Memphis, Tennessee, 38105. And that concludes the obituaries and death notices that are listed in today's Cape Cod Times. And we are through with our local and regional news, so we will move back to the front page and begin reading the national and international news. Top Democrats rule out replacing Biden, by David Morgan and Jarrett Renshaw of Reuters in Washington. Top Democrats on Sunday ruled out the possibility of replacing President Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee after a feeble debate performance and called on party members to focus instead on the consequences of a second Donald Trump presidency. After days of hand-wringing about Biden and the outcome of the November 5th election, Democratic leaders firmly rejected calls for their party to choose a younger presidential candidate. Biden, who was 81 years old, was huddling with family members at the Camp David presidential retreat, with his political future a likely topic of discussion. But the drumbeat of calls for Biden to step aside continued, and a post-debate CBS poll showed a 10-point jump in the number of Democrats who believe Biden should not be running for president, to 46% from 36% of Democrats in February. The unfortunate truth is that Biden should withdraw from the race. For the good of the nation he has served so admirably for half a century, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution said in an editorial on Sunday. The shade of retirement is now necessary for President Biden. Absolutely not, responded Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock, one of several Democrats seen as a possible replacement for Biden. Bad debates happen, he told NBC's Meet the Press. The question is, who has Donald Trump ever shown up for other than himself and people like himself? I'm with Joe Biden, and it's our assignment to make sure that he gets over the finish line come November. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, who could become Speaker next year if his party can take control of the House in November, acknowledged that Biden suffered a setback in his debate with Trump. the former president and presumptive Republican candidate. "I believe a setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback," he told MSNBC. "So the moment that we're in right now is a comeback moment, and it's going to require all of us to lean in, articulate a forward-looking message as to why the Democratic platform is best equipped to deal with the challenges facing the American people." Another top House Democrat, Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina, agreed. "He should stay in this race. He should demonstrate it going forward, his capacity to lead the country," he told CNN. During the debate, a hoarse-sounding Biden delivered a shaky, halting performance in which he stumbled over his words on several occasions. Some Democrats later said privately that the showing could prove to be disqualifying. Republicans blasted Democratic claims that Biden's poor debate performance was a one-off. This idea that Biden had a bad night, that's not the story. He's had a bad presidency, had a disastrous debate, said Lindsey Graham, a South Carolina Republican senator, to CNN. But in his own debate performance, Trump unleashed a barrage of criticisms, many of which were well-worn falsehoods, lies that he has long repeated, including claims that migrants have carried out a crime wave, that Democrats support infanticide, and that he actually won the 2020 election. After a frenzied run of 7 campaign events across 4 states since Thursday's debate, Biden headed to Camp David on Saturday for a pre-planned family gathering. That includes a family photo shoot, said 2 people familiar with the scheduling. The attendees include his wife, Jill Biden, as well as the Biden children and grandchildren. While the trip had been planned for months, the timing and circumstances of Biden being surrounded by family members who have weighed heavily in his past decisions to run for the presidency have added to the scrutiny around the visit. With Democratic leaders rallying around his candidacy, it will be up to Biden to decide whether he wants to end his re-election bid. Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison and Biden campaign manager Julie Chavez Rodriguez held a Saturday afternoon call with dozens of committee members across the country, a group of some of the most influential members of the party. The call was part pep talk, part planning meeting for the upcoming national convention, according to 2 people who were on the call, and they requested anonymity to talk about private discussions. Final story on the front page of today's Cape Cod Times, dated Monday, July 1st of 2024. Climate change driving more rain and floods by Dinah Voiles-Pulver of USA Today. A raging flood pulled a family's home of more than 50 years into the Blue Earth River in southern Minnesota last week as a community watched in horror. The river's water flow had tripled in 3 days after 11 to 18 inches of rain fell in a little more than a week. The swollen river carved a new pathway around the Rapidan Dam, threatening to collapse the dam and the nearby store where the home's owners, the Brusca family, had served up pies and shakes for decades. Similar intense rains have pummeled much of the north-central U.S. in June, causing devastating floods across the region, with major flooding underway on the Big and Little Sioux Rivers, the Des Moines River, and the Minnesota River. Such events are occurring with increasing frequency across the nation. Rain isn't just falling, it's breaking records and falling at intense rates brought on by the warming climate. Flooding has always occurred along rivers and streams, but now the warmer air allows the atmosphere to hold more water, and storms are often supercharged by the flow of moisture from warming oceans. As communities flood more often, the pressure is growing to prepare for and adapt to more frequent flooding. That pressure is reflected in 2 new developments over the past month: a groundbreaking climate action law in Vermont and a federally commissioned report that finds the government's calculations for maximum potential rainfall are no longer valid, thanks to the more intense rainfall that's driven by climate change. As has been shown time and time again, event after event, climate change is leading to wetter, more extreme precipitation events, said Kevin Reed, an associate provost for climate and sustainability programming at Stony Brook University. who studies the impact of the warming climate on rainfall. More than 200 stream gauges in the north-central U.S. were in various stages of flooding last week, including the Blue Earth River, where the water had finally started to recede, according to U.S. Geological Survey data. In Vermont, a 9-inch deluge last July triggered a devastating flood, with damages estimated at $1 billion. That flooding spurred state legislators in May to approve a new law dubbed the Climate Superfund Act. Vermont had just faced one of the most catastrophic climate disasters in its history, said Elena Mihaly, vice president of the Conservation Law Foundation of Vermont, which helped lobby for the bill. It was a very frightening time where Vermonters really felt the vulnerability. The legislation aims to recover the costs of such climate disasters by seeking payments from large fossil fuel companies for their extraction and refining activities that cause climate-related impacts in Vermont over a period dating back to 1995. The state plans to conduct a cost analysis to determine what the costs are to Vermont now and in the future from the extraction and refinement of the products that produce greenhouse gas emissions, Mihaly said, to help recoup costs that are now falling entirely on taxpayers' shoulders. The money collected will be earmarked for climate change adaptation projects. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine published the new rainfall study, sponsored by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, after it was directed by Congress to bring the nation's probable maximum precipitation estimates into line with the changing climate. The worst-case scenario precipitation estimates, which set the greatest depth of precipitation possible over a given duration at a particular location and time of year, are used by engineers when designing and building critical facilities such as dams and nuclear power plants. The estimates are used to reduce the risk of catastrophic flooding and build structures that can withstand extreme rainfall. The academies convened a committee with some of the nation's leading experts on extreme rainfall, who met in workshops with additional experts, such as Reed. The committee found that climate change has resulted in historical changes in extreme rainfall and the likelihood that greater changes will occur over the coming decades. Its report presents a broad range of recommendations to develop more accurate estimates by improving modeling and formulas and incorporating additional scientific research. Combining the more high-tech observations available with a better understanding of extreme storms and newer high-resolution modeling can transform the old way of calculating rainfall estimates, the report said. Updated estimates could take into account the extremes likely to occur in a warming world and provide crucial information about the hazards that come with extreme rainfall, including coastal storm surge and compound flooding. Although the original intent of the precipitation estimates was to design structures that would never fail, we've probably been designing things so they have a very low risk of failure, but not impossible, said committee member John Nielsen Gammon, Texas State climatologist and Regents professor at Texas A&M University. A very low risk of failure is less comforting than no risk. If you don't take climate change into account, you underestimate the risk, not just in the future, but even the present-day risk, because the chances of extreme rainfall have been increasing almost everywhere, Nielsen Gammon said. NOAA expects to issue the first updated estimates by 2030, if the program is fully funded, their website says. The next headline, Hippie Gathering Shut Down Before It Starts in California, by Max Hauptmann. A longtime counterculture festival, now in its 5th decade, set to be held over the July 4th holidays being shut down, with U.S. Forest Service officials citing a lack of appropriate permitting and concerns over environmental impact. The Rainbow Family of Living Light gathering was set to be held the first week of July in California's Plumas National Forest. On June 25th, however, Forest Service officials issued an order asking people to leave the area, with those who refused to go facing fines of up to $5,000 or a 6-month jail sentence. The forest is concerned about the 500-plus individuals already dispersed camping in a concentrated area. We're always willing to work with any organization or group interested in recreating on the national forest. Their existing and projected impacts on natural and cultural resources and other authorized uses. Our priority is maintaining public health and safety and the appropriate stewardship of public lands and natural resources, Plumas National Forest Supervisor Chris Carlton said in a statement on June 26th. While the current retro wave may be more focused on the 1990s and 2000s, the Rainbow Family Gathering is a self-described hippie commune that gathers once a year in the first week of July. It was started in Colorado in 1972. The Rainbow Family Gathering was founded in part by military veterans struggling with alcoholism, drug dependence, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Camping out on public land is a central part of the experience. Exact attendance is unknown and it varies from year to year, but the U.S. Forest Service this year estimated the event could draw as many as 10,000 visitors. This year, the U.S. Forest Service has described the gathering as having an unauthorized, non-commercial group use incident that can have significant impacts on traffic, communities, local resources, residents, and visitors. That particular brand of lawlessness has often brought the gathering into conflict with local police over drug use, sanitation, and damage to forests. As USA Today has previously reported, many attendees planned to work to minimize their impact on the environment. But as with any gathering of this size, previous iterations have involved incidents and arrests. Every year, the Plumas National Forest sees a large surge in visitors in late June and early July, enjoying not only summer recreation in the forest, but also numerous events in our communities around the July 4th holiday, said Plumas National Forest Supervisor Chris Carlton in a press release last week. We understand the addition of the Rainbow Family Gathering on the Plumas National Forest raises concerns about additional impacts to our local communities, natural resources, and our environment, and we'll be working with the incident team to minimize adverse effects as much as possible. On June 26th, Lassen County Supervisor Jason Ingram praised the U.S. Forest Service's decision on social media, writing on Facebook that my concerns with this gathering were always the illegality aspect, the increased fire risk this would have created, the environmental impact, and the blatant disrespect shown to our local tribes. Events are fine, but not events that blatantly disregard the law and endanger our land and community fire safety. The next headline, weather in the news quite a bit these days. Very dangerous beryl, B-E-R-Y-L, roars toward Caribbean. By Crystal Nurse, Dinah Voiles-Pulver, and Susan Miller of USA Today. Beryl, the first hurricane of the 2024 season, intensified Sunday into a high-octane Category 4 storm, packing 130-mile-an-hour winds as it barreled toward the Caribbean. The National Hurricane Center said its reconnaissance aircraft found that Beryl, which was 350 miles east-southeast of Barbados on Sunday, is now an extremely dangerous hurricane. Life-threatening winds and powerful storm surge were expected, and Beryl could deliver a devastating strike on the Windward Islands early Monday, the center said. Swells are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip currents, and the storm surge may reach 5 to 7 feet above normal tide levels, bringing large destructive waves to the coast, the Hurricane Center said. The Windward Islands are the group of Caribbean islands in the eastern part of the Caribbean Sea that include Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines and Grenada. Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago are sometimes included in the group as well. Hurricane warnings were in effect Sunday for Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadine Islands, Grenada, and Tobago. A tropical storm warning was in effect for Martinique. A tropical storm watch was in effect for Dominica and Trinidad. The Hurricane Center urged anyone living in the central and western Caribbean to monitor the storm's track given the uncertainty of the forecast. Wind speeds on the island could be up to 30% stronger on the tops and windward sides of hills and mountains, possibly even higher, the center said, adding that catastrophic wind damage was possible. St. Vincent and the Grenadines in Grenada were most at risk. Rainfall could cause flooding, and the storm is expected to dump 3 to 6 inches in Barbados and the Windward Islands into Monday. After Beryl's center moves across the Windward Islands early Monday, the storm will cross the southeastern and central Caribbean Sea through Wednesday. Beryl could bring 1 to 4 inches of rain to southeastern Puerto Rico Monday night and into Tuesday. Will it hit the U.S.? It's too soon to determine the path and strength of Beryl when the storm gets to the western half of the Caribbean later this week and whether it could affect the U.S. Gulf Coast. The Hurricane Center expects Beryl to remain a hurricane as it reaches Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula on Friday. But forecasters warned U.S. residents to stay vigilant. At this point, the most likely scenario is for the storm to move westward into Mexico. However, it's very important to note that if the high pressure across the southeast weakens, that can allow the storm to move farther north and potentially directly impact the Gulf Coast, AccuWeather lead hurricane forecaster Alex De Silva said. Beryl is the first hurricane of what's expected to be an extraordinarily active 2024 season because of the cooling winds of El Niño. Contributing to that was Doyle Rice and Mike Snyder. Israeli tanks advance into areas in North and South Gaza by Nidal al-Maghrabi and Kamal Hamdan of Reuters in Cairo. Israeli forces advanced further on Sunday into the Shajaya neighborhood of northern Gaza and also pushed deeper into western and central Rafah in the south, killing at least 6 Palestinians and destroying several homes, residents said. Israeli tanks, which moved back into Shajaya 4 days ago, fired shells toward several houses, leaving families trapped inside and unable to leave, the residents said. Speaking at the start of the weekly cabinet meeting on Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated his position that there was no substitute for achieving victory in the war against Hamas. Our forces are operating in Rafah, Shajaya, everywhere in the Gaza Strip. Dozens of terrorists are being eliminated every day. This is a difficult fight that's being waged above ground, sometimes in hand-to-hand combat, and below ground as well, Netanyahu said. We're committed to fighting until we achieve all of our objectives, eliminating Hamas, returning all of our hostages, ensuring that Gaza never again constitutes a threat to Israel, and returning our residents securely to their homes in the south and the north, he added. The Israeli military said forces operating in Shajaya had over the past day killed several Palestinian gunmen. Israeli forces located military infrastructure inside a United Nations school and discovered dozens of weapons and valuable intelligence documents, the military also said. On Saturday, the military announced the deaths of 2 Israeli soldiers in northern Gaza. At another Israeli raid in Shajaya, the forces located a terrorist war room at a clinic, according to the military, which again accused Hamas of embedding itself in civilian structures for terror purposes. Hamas denies using civilian sites such as schools and hospitals for military purposes. The armed wing of Hamas and the allied Islamic Jihad reported fierce fighting in both Shajaya and Rafah, saying their fighters had fired anti-tank rockets and mortar bombs against Israeli forces operating there. More than 8 months into Israel's air and ground war in Gaza, militants continue to stage attacks on Israeli forces, operating in areas that the Israeli army said it had gained control over months ago. Arab mediators' efforts, which were backed by the U.S., have so far failed to secure a ceasefire. Hamas says any deal must end the war and bring a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Israel says it will accept only temporary pauses in the fighting until Hamas, which has governed Gaza since 2007 and has sworn to erase Israel, is eradicated. In Rafah, near the border with Egypt, Israeli tanks pushed deeper into several districts in the east, west, and center of the city, and medics said 6 people had been killed in an Israeli strike on a home in Shabura in the heart of the city. The 6 bodies from the Zurub family were transferred to Nasser Hospital in the nearby city of Khan Yunis. On Sunday, dozens of relatives paid their respects before the bodies, which were wrapped in white shrouds, then carried them in their arms to prepared graves. Our final story in the Cape Cod Times of today, Monday, July 1st, has a headline that reads, High Court Set to Rule on Trump Immunity by John Kurzel and Andrew Goodsword of Reuters in Washington. Donald Trump's bid for criminal immunity from prosecution for trying to overturn his 2020 election loss is set to be decided today, Monday, by the Supreme Court. But however it rules, the court already has helped the former president in his effort to avoid trial before the November 5th election. The ruling from the court, whose 6-3 conservative majority includes 3 justices appointed by Trump, will be released 20 weeks after he sought relief from the justices. The timeline of the ruling likely does not leave enough time for special counsel Jack Smith to try Trump on the federal 4-count indictment obtained last August, and for a jury to reach a verdict before voters head to the polls. The amount of delay that's resulted has made it almost impossible to get the case to trial before the election, said George Washington University law professor Randall Eliason, a former federal prosecutor. The court should have treated it with much more urgency than it did. Trump is the Republican candidate challenging Democratic President Joe Biden in a 2020 election rematch. He's the first former U.S. president to be criminally prosecuted, already has been convicted in a case by New York State Court involving falsifying documents around hush money paid to a porn star before the 2016 election. If he regains the presidency, Trump could try to force an end to the special counsel's case or potentially pardon himself for any federal crimes. The Supreme Court already has handed Trump important victories. On Friday, it raised the legal bar for prosecutors pursuing obstruction charges in the federal election subversion case against Trump and defendants involved in the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, the insurrection. In March, the court threw out a judicial decision that had disqualified Trump from the presidential primary ballot in Colorado. The speed with which the court dispatched the Colorado case, quickly agreeing to decide it and ruling in Trump's favor within a month of hearing arguments, contrasted with a sluggish pace in resolving Trump's immunity bid that's been to his benefit. Trump's trial's been scheduled to start on March 4th before the delays over the immunity issue. Now, no trial date is currently set. Trump has pleaded not guilty and called the case politically motivated. I don't think that there's any way the case goes to trial before the election, said Georgetown University law professor Erica Hashimoto. Even if the Supreme Court were to affirm the lower courts and say that Trump doesn't have immunity, the trial court still has to decide a bunch of other legal issues. Smith, seeking to avoid trial delays, asked the justices in December to perform a fast-track review after Trump's immunity claim was rejected by U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. Trump opposed the bid. Rather than resolve the matter promptly, the justices denied Smith's request and let the case proceed in a lower court, which upheld Chutkan's ruling against Trump on February 6th. After Trump sought Supreme Court relief on February 12th, more than 10 weeks had elapsed before the justices heard the case on April 25th, their final day of arguments. And now the ruling will be issued on the final day of the term, nearly 9 months after Trump first made a motion to dismiss the charges based on his claim of immunity. If the Supreme Court rules that former presidents have some degree of criminal immunity, an approach some of the justices appear to favor during arguments, it could delay the case further. Under one such scenario, the justices could order Chutkan to preside over a potentially time-consuming legal battle about whether certain allegations against Trump must be stricken before the case could advance to trial. The trial judge also likely will have to decide what, if any, impact the Supreme Court's decision to heighten the legal standard for prosecutors pursuing obstruction charges against a January 6th defendant will have on Trump, who faces 2 charges under the same obstruction law. Chutkan has previously indicated she would give Trump at least 3 months to prepare for a trial once the case returns to her courtroom. That timeline leaves only a narrow path for a trial to start in October, in the final weeks before the election. A trial so close to Election Day would almost certainly draw claims of election interference from Trump and his legal team. The court's delay in deciding the immunity case has already given Donald Trump a huge win, the delay he sought to push his trial on election interference, and any verdict in the trial until after the election, University of Michigan law professor Leah Littman said. And with that, we've come to the end of our reading of the Cape Cod Times of Monday, July 1st. This is your reader, Eric, saying be well, be safe, look after each other. Remember our veterans, especially those who have recently passed. Bye for now.